Hello, excellent people. This is your Daily Excellence for April 28th, 2021. And today I want to talk about how, in my opinion, survival is still real. And by real, I mean you still need to consider survival in your decision making processes. So, yesterday I spoke a lot about fear. I actually kind of went on and on about fear because I think fear is an interesting topic. And the reason I went about survival today is because we often think of survival as this sort of like distant past of the Paleolithic human who used to have to fight to survive on a daily basis. And we kind of think of that, there's a famous quote from I really don't remember which philosopher, economist, talking about nature red in tooth and claw. And then there's the nasty, brutish, and short thing from, I think, Hobbes. There's a lot of people who talk about nature and the state of nature and the Paleolithic human and the survival impetus. And there are people who glorify it, who basically say, oh man, men were real back in the day when they were killing mammoths for their dinner. And women were real back in the day when they were, I don't know, gathering nuts for their dinner. Um, I'm not one of the people who likes to glorify that stuff. I certainly appreciate where we came from and admire where we came from. I admire the myriad hardships that we as humans have had to overcome as a species to get to where we are. But I'm not interested in glorifying it. I'm also not interested in downplaying the severity of our current situation. I believe that survival is still a very real decision making um, influencer. I think that certainly there are different people in different life circumstances in different countries of this world who this is kind of obvious. Like, if you're living in sub Saharan Africa or Central America or even, in the various parts of cities in the United States that I've never been to, and you're really truly faced with violence or deprivation on a daily basis, that kind of person knows what I'm talking about. This person doesn't need to hear this. But the kinds of people who are comfortable and can go home and sit on the couch and watch their television, there's definitely a feeling that survival is a long ways away. But I think that that's a mistake. In particular, I want to take this a little bit abstract. So that fear conversation was pretty abstract. And one of the cases I was making in the fear conversation was up here on this abstract level, you're afraid of something, some change, some decision you're going to have to make, some action you're going to have to take. And I was making the argument that you can strategically leverage that fear and make a decision. But it's fairly abstract. So let's bring it down at least one level to something less abstract. And let's talk about survival. And let's talk about why survival still matters. So before I go too far on that, I do want to make a point that the reason I'm bringing this up is because the goal of this, if you find my reasoning compelling, I want to impart upon you that because survival matters, you must act. You cannot passively move your way through life. So let's talk about where survival matters. I kind of think of the person as having three main parts. We have the physical, we have the mental, we have the emotional. For me, emotional and spiritual tend to be kind of lumped into the same thing, although you can start breaking this out into more and more fine grained things. But I believe that illness of the physical, mental, or emotional bodies is a very real thing. That obviously the physical illness is the easy one to see. And I love the physical analogies because physical analogies are easy to grasp. But physical analogies are simply proxies for mental and emotional analogies. And what I believe is we have to decide on a daily basis to act in a way as though survival matters, because if we don't, we will become ill physically, mentally, or emotionally, depending on our individual life circumstances. If we make poor dietary decisions, we become physically ill. If we make poor employment, or let's take it out of employment. Let's say when you interact with your fellow human and you find yourself consistently not being treated the way you want to be, but you don't say anything about it, you will become emotionally ill. You will see yourself in a negative light. You will see others in a negative light. You will begin to engage in the negative dialogue that's so common of the mentally ill I'm sorry, the emotionally ill, because mental illness is the other thing. I don't personally know a lot about mental illness, and so I don't want to sort of step outside my lane here. So I'll take a slightly less um, aggressive approach to mental illness, and let's talk about mental atrophy instead. So I personally have always been an avid reader. I am very capable of teaching myself skills from reading or from research in a broad sense. I'm very willing to just try something with a sort of low level of information, do my best, and then from my failures, I find ways to ask questions that can help me grow. So the kind of person who does not seek new information, their mind atrophies and they become very, very closed minded. I believe closed mindedness is kind of a low level mental illness. And so the case I'm trying to make here is that all three of these are survival concerns: the survival of your body over the long term, the survival of your mind over the long term, the survival of your emotional, spiritual well being, pardon me, over the long term. I'm almost about to get the hiccups. Hopefully, I won't. So, that's what I'm trying to draw attention to. And I know that you could say, well, the survival is not as immediate. And maybe it's not. But I would argue that it actually is immediate. It's just the action is slow, but the impact actually is felt immediately because we don't feel the slow decay of our bodies on a day to day basis. When we make bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, what usually happens is something breaks, right? We all know the metaphor about the straw that broke the camel's back. That's what happens with all three of these things. And so, what I'm trying to implore you to recognize is the solution to physical illness, to mental illness in the way that I described it, and emotional illness in the way that I described it, is to acknowledge the danger and to act accordingly, as though the threat were immediately existential rather than long-term existential. And that's I think the key to all of this is, can you see that the threat is existential and it is a survival concern, and can you take action accordingly even though it doesn't look like a mammoth charging you or a poison plant that looks just like the edible plant that you're trying to pick, right? Going back to our kind of Paleolithic, easy. We like to think of the Paleolithic stuff as an easy example of what it would be like to have to survive. But like I said, I think that's the easy road, not only descriptively but also mentally. As you personally, you have real survival concerns, and you must act as though they are real. You must act as though they are existential. So I will leave you with that for today. Go out there, be excellent, act excellently.